everybody, my name is Agata Cieplik and I will talk today about the horror story of MySQL Dumper. But first, let me introduce myself, the main character of this horror story. I'm a software engineer born and raised in Poland, and that's also where I started getting my first work experience, working on different payment systems and payment terminals. About 3.5 years ago, I moved to the United States where I started working for Dropbox. My role here is called Infrastructure Software Engineer, and majority of time I just try to make things work faster. Besides that, I do photography, travel if there's no coronavirus pandemic around, and ride motorcycles. In 2018, I went on a cross-country motorcycle trip from New York to California, and you could technically read about it on my travel blog if you spoke Polish. I also keep telling everybody that I am funny, just so you know. This story consists of 4 chapters. First one is just an introduction to what this horror story project was about, though later I will talk about how it actually turned out. Afterwards, I wanted to share some key learnings from my work on this project, and last but not least, talk about how I turned it into my success story and how you could do it too. So let's start with briefly describing the origin of the project. I wonder how many people watching have heard of or used Dropbox Paper before. If it's the first time you're hearing about it, totally give it a try. It's our awesome text editor, and a few years back I worked in the infrastructure team in Paper. One day my manager came to me and asked whether I'd like to help with figuring out our analytics issues. Due to some unknown problem, the analytics team was left without any new incoming data from Paper. They were basically not able to reliably assess Paper's growth without it. I was switching between projects at that time and thought to myself, why not? How hard it can be, right? Let me just fix it. The first thing I did was to figure out what's the current situation and how badly we wanted to fix it. The issue was not insignificant, as the growth analysis overall is used to further decide on the product's direction, etc. So we wanted to bring the data sending sidecar to a state in which it was at least able to deliver the data. And as I quickly learned, there was just a daily processing job that was dumping several MySQL tables, processing them slightly, and then sending them to the analytics system through a dedicated pipeline. The problem was, however, that what my team noticed, the whole pipeline significantly slowed down all of a sudden, meaning that it couldn't deliver anything to the analytics system. There was also no monitoring, so unless the analytics team pinged us, we were basically running blind, and to make it even better, that part of the system was not isolated and was using all the shared resources in deployment pipeline as the main product. We wanted to change it. The idea was that the system should be fast and more reliable, so no one in the team will need to think about it any longer. And yet, the overall assumption was still that it's a minor project and will probably not take too much time. Imagine this is a horror story. And, as the title suggests, we are in the empty house and all of a sudden there's a screeching sound coming from the dark basement. And we obviously go to check it out. And as we walk down the stairs, we notice a huge cage covered with a blanket. And as it always happens in horror stories, we uncover the cage to see what's there. And when I did that with my project, this is what I found. A rhino and a whole bunch of other wild animals. A 10-year-old codebase, not yet fully integrated with the rest of Dropbox, since we only acquired Paper not long before. First time I actually heard about Rhino was when I joined Paper. So for those of you who are surprised to see it here, Rhino is an open source implementation of JavaScript, written entirely in Java, which basically means that you can run your JavaScript on JVM or together with some Java or Scala code. Because of this unique tech stack, completely different from the rest of Dropbox, Paper could also not use any of the existing tools and libraries that other teams were maintaining. I made a feature request and was promised that one day our setup will also be supported, but until then, I had to deal with the system on my own. Again, the expectations were that the project is not going to take too long and it's not going to be too hard to fix it. But do you remember this? Let's quickly go through what was actually happening. There was a total of 9 different MySQL tables to process, each of them storing tens of millions of rows. From now on, let's call processing a table a job, which means that we had 9 jobs total. Paper initiated a database connection and was streaming results row by row, as a result holding it for like hours, since this is how long it took for one job to finish. The job processing manager was written in Scala and was running alongside other important things on a regular production host. There was no good way to do integration testing, though, due to other parts of the pipeline, such as analytics system. So one of the first things that I did was talking to the analytics team to understand their situation better, but also to figure out how I can test the system. And the result was that I could technically test on production. So my initial ideas were to grab as many low-hanging fruits as possible. Firstly, I needed some new metrics and monitoring, otherwise I will just keep running blind and I will not even know where the system wasted time and what to compare the results to. One of the simplest solutions was to move the job processing to its own dedicated EC2 instance so that it could run in full speed using as many resources as it wishes. And as I added the metrics, I was now able to better track what was happening with the MySQL Dumper. Moving the job processing to a separate, dedicated instance had a positive effect. Things started moving, and I was able to identify the most expensive job. Processing the biggest table was now taking about 500 minutes. It now also made sense to check the host level metrics, and it was fascinating to find that a network graph looked roughly like this. It looked a little bit suspicious that the line that was showing the number of bytes sent was basically flat during processing and was really close to the maximum the instance was able to send. I checked with the configuration of MySQL Dumper's instance, and for those that are familiar with AWS, it was C4 for X large. And compared it with the newer generation, in this case C5 for X large, and the only parameter I was interested in was network. And it seemed that C5 had a guarantee of 10 gigabits, while C4's configuration was significantly worse in this case. So I decided to simply give it a shot, and as it turned out, changing the instance type actually made a difference. I swapped the instances and the network usage dropped, while performance significantly improved. We went down from 500 to 400 minutes. After the initial success, I was really excited, but it was still not ideal and I didn't want to stop there. Next low-hanging fruit in the line occurred to me after analyzing the profiling data and figuring out where MySQL Dumpers is spending most of its time. So let's take a quick look at what we have here. We have a zoom on processing a single row from a single table. One more time, we have 9 tables, each of them has millions of rows. And for every row, the code does some fetching, some sending, and some other minor operations, and then spends majority of time processing column names, which technically are constant for every row, right? And running a regex, changing them from camel case to the snake case format. Analytics system was expecting the snake case, and we couldn't just get rid of this requirement, but we can still do one thing, just take the regex out of the loop and perform it only once per processing a single row. And what happened here? I just got rid of the regex and all of a sudden processing a single row is a breeze. So it turned out that taking the regex out of the loop improved certain parts of the code by 4 times. I actually found multiple little monsters like this one. And basically by taking things out of the loop, I managed to improve the performance by 10 times. So if you remember, one of the most expensive tables was taking over 400 minutes to finish processing, and after those minor improvements, the time dropped down to 43. I was really proud of myself, and tapping myself on the shoulder each and every day, seeing how things work fast, confirming with the analytics team that they are receiving the data. last thing was to make the system more reliable, because keep in mind that I still don't know when we will be able to switch to a better tooling that a separate team in Dropbox actually provides. And until then, I wanted to keep the system up, running, healthy, and make sure that it's not prone to any random interruptions. And one of the solutions was to use a cursor that we recently introduced in paper. So when using cursor, MySQL Dumper basically would only go to the database for short communication and ask for a batch instead of streaming the data for a long time. After that, the offset is saved in Redis with keys that have a predefined time to leave. With this, if MySQL Dumper for whatever reason is interrupted, for example, the host is replaced or a new code version pushed, it can easily restart where it left off. We had a cursor's implementation already in place. I didn't need to write my own. The only problem was that all the MySQL Dumper code was written in Scala, including the communication library responsible for actually sending the data out. But the cursor's library was in TypeScript. The thing is that when selecting the same data from MySQL using Scala and TypeScript, you're going to get different results. In TypeScript, types are pretty simple. Numeric data is just a number and nobody wonders whether it's an integer, a long, a double. When thinking of running TypeScript in JVM though, number is represented as double. So all the numeric data selected from database, no matter how it's defined, becomes a double in JVM. However, when MySQL Dumper's code was previously in Scala, the same data was represented as long, and this was also what the communication library was expecting from MySQL Dumper. Long story short, I ended up with something along those lines. So think about it. I promised you a story about making things more reliable and faster, and now I'm showing you this snippet. Well, at least I was trying to be honest, calling this a horror story. Basically, I didn't want to rewrite everything when starting to use the cursor. I wanted to import some existing Java code and just went with the hacky if statement to figure out how we wanted each data type to be represented. Since everything is running in Rhino, I actually was able to do a simple type conversion to, for example, Java long, which is just awesome. In TypeScript, though, we lose type information when the value is null. So passing null as the value for any type in the Java call is alright. However, some of the underlying code was not expecting the values to be empty, so I just had to keep that in mind when fixing the implementation. Another interesting thing is that if, for whatever reason, the value is set to undefined, JVM treats it as a string of value undefined. And that's another source of potentially hard to track bugs in the codebase. Even though porting the main logic of MySQL Dumper to TypeScript was somewhat challenging and cumbersome, it paid off really well. The thing that I was mostly happy about was being able to restart the processing anytime. Be it a host down or a code push, this really helped ensure that the data is going to be delivered and that analytics team was going to be happy. And they were happy. It was good enough. I didn't spend too much time working on it, and the results were really satisfying. MySQL Dumper was working just fine, and it was not affected by other daily processes. It was also fast and had some basic monitoring and alerting. It was good enough to leave it in this state and hope that before I even notice, I will be able to use some internal Dropbox tooling with our setup and just forget about this project altogether. I'm not sure whether you're fans of horror stories, but I think there's always this moment in all of them when the main character kind of gets to stretch and relax and starts to feel comfortable, and I'd risk saying that too comfortable, and this was definitely a case. It wasn't until a few weeks later when all of a sudden the analytics team reached out to me asking what happened with their data. It was kind of hard to pinpoint to any specific issue. I tried different things to see whether it will help. Change the batch size, increase delays between batches, change the number of working threads, but nothing seemed to help. The data was still missing. So do you remember this super simple diagram of the system? Well, to be fair, it's actually overly simplified and somewhat a lie. Let me show you what it actually looked like. This is a more accurate picture of what was going on. there's a separate MySQL instance that's running our paper's MySQL, and then as it's sending the data, it doesn't communicate directly with the analytics system. In fact, there's two more services running on the same instance that are involved in this communication and owned by another team. So I decided to loop them in and ask for help. Logger and Data Center were designed to send information to analytics system from time to time with message size and QPS restrictions, and they were maintaining their internal queuing system and creating batches internally. They were also designed for a completely different purpose, and because of that, it was fine for them to drop the messages after 2 failures. And Paper was just a special snowflake using Logger and Data Center in a way they were not designed for. And at this point, the whole investigation started to become too complex, and I decided to take a step back and redesign the system slightly. I decided to create multiple MySQL Dumper instances, and since I was already using Redis to back the Cursor's implementation, and we used Redis as a way to keep track of healthy hosts in a cluster anyways, I decided to use this to distribute the jobs between instances. The algorithm was really simple. Each MySQL Dumper would ask for all healthy MySQL Dumper instance IDs, sort them, and find its own index in the list, then use that and the number of hosts in the cluster to figure out which tables should it process. It will make that decision for every badge. So when the new host was added to a cluster mid-processing, the jobs would reshard seamlessly, and the new instance would pick up where the work was left off thanks to the usage of Cursor. To raise loggers and data centers restrictions, I also rate limited MySQL Dumper's code even more, since speed was no longer crucial for successful processing. And with this setup, the team was able to truly forget about MySQL Dumper, and it stayed untouched for at least a year and a half afterwards. So, just to quickly summarize the end result, it was automated and monitored, so the team no longer needed to rely on manual verification and wait for the analytics team to reach out. It required minimal operational work. Adding a new job to the pool was a simple, pretty straightforward process, as cluster would reshard jobs automatically. Adding a new host to the pool was also not problematic, which meant that we could delegate all the host-level operational work to Dropbox automations. The ultimate goal, which is making the analytics team happy and basically enabling them to do their work, was also achieved, and as a result, that version of MySQL Dumper was up and running for way longer than I initially thought it would be. You can also call this my personal success, because aside from the fact that I worked on multiple other projects that year, this one has been remembered by many people who later wrote my yearly performance review and mentioned it as a great showcase of my skills. The project, even though some of its parts seemed goofy on the surface, was actually a great learning opportunity for me. And let me point out a few most important things that I learned when working on MySQL Dumper. I think the first thing that's worth mentioning is just being aware of limitations of your setup, what you can or cannot do. In my case, Rhino was trying really hard to sabotage the project, but I already knew that it's misbehaving when trying to run both TypeScript and Java code. I was also ready to make certain trade-offs and accept that the result won't be perfect. Next thing that I really want to stress hard is that writing efficient code really matters. Even the smallest thing just add up. In my project's case, that was a 10x performance improvement just by moving things out of the loop. Next thing that was actually the aha moment for me is that hardware matters. Just think which resources are going to be overly used by the project and actually try to pick what's the best instance type or hardware for the particular project. MySQL Dumper was for most part sending data over to another host, and in this case looking for the highest network bandwidth made sense. And finally, communication. Lots of time, the simplest solution is to just reach out to other people and ask for their help and expertise. And I can't stress enough how communication with the analytics team helped me progress, figure out the test scenario, and make proper design decisions. Also, asking owners of Logger for help simply sped up the debugging. Finally, we made it to the last part. Thank you for staying with me for so long, because now's the fun part. How to actually turn a horror project such as MySQL Dumper, which doesn't really seem like an interesting engineering challenge nor impactful and one that lasted way too long, into your success story. Believe me or not, this is actually quite possible and definitely a super useful thing, given that not all the projects that we will ever work on are super exciting, hard engineering problems that save lives. So, what can you do to make your work recognized, your skills valued, even when the project you currently work on is not the most fun and appreciated one? I obviously don't know the general answer to this question, but I'm going to tell you what I did to make Mysqldumper my success. I would say there's at least 6 points to a successful project. Firstly, communicate out. I made it known that this project was happening, both within the team but also outside with the stakeholders, letting them know of my work and establishing relationships with them. I also had multiple success metrics that I could present. The performance improvements were an obvious choice, but most importantly, the actual gain from the project. Number of previous failures compared to current, stable state, and how it enabled the analytics team to work. At the end, I sent out the document which summarized the project and all the learnings and sent it out to the entire paper team, hoping that every person would get something out of it, be it just having a good laugh or not repeating my mistakes in their future work. What is also super important is that I documented the whole system and commented not straightforward parts of the code so that changing it in the future wouldn't be a problem for someone else. I also showcased that operational work matters to me and made sure that my Mysqldumper was emitting important metrics and had proper alerting in place with filled-in playbooks so that in case of any future fires, we wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel. In the same time, when redesigning, I tried making the system ops work free as much as possible. And last but not least is what we call managing complexity. I showed that I can decouple complex problems, cooperate with multiple stakeholders, and with small iterations, manage to fix the mystery of this horror story. And this is something that I definitely call a success. And that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this horror story. And now it's your turn to make your next project a success story that you'll be talking about for years. Thank you.